All right, back with another video in our Writing and AI series. And if you can't tell from the start, I'm a little under the weather here, so I have to apologize for people listening in. But that said, I am so excited that we'll have the opportunity today to learn from John Meehan. John is an educator himself, professional development, I'll just say guru, rock star. Also, I got a chance to learn from him here at the ESU level, both in person and go through some of the trainings that he offers. But I've also just really appreciated our informal conversations and collaboration around a myriad of topics, one of which has been AI. And so we're going to explore AI supported draft work in this particular video. And when we say that, we're really talking about, hey, maybe near the end of that brainstorming time, but then maybe not quite to the editing phase yet. Like as we kind of get in between those two spaces, what does that interplay look like between artificial intelligence and human intelligence? And so for a little context ahead of this, though, John, kind of set us up for that, exploring that topic.
Well, yeah, thank you, Andrew, for having me on the show. I'm a high school English teacher by trade, so be able to hang out with people who want to talk about writing, awesome. And I think the big secret is every class is always doing some level of teaching of writing, whether you're teaching about writing of history stuff, or writing of philosophy stuff, writing in other languages, writing about other cultures, or even the numeracy or literacy skills that really permeate everything. Like you want your students to be able to read, write, speak, present, and to defend with real facts about this fake news, right? And so how do we get ourselves to a space that authentic and that artificial can kind of coexist? Because I don't think it's going anywhere. I think if the last maybe 36 months have proven anything, it's that this AI stuff is everything but a fad. I feel like when I stepped into the mall, everyone's trying to sell me CBD oil because it's like now that's in Maryland, it's what you give you. Now I feel like every product under the sun is trying to sell me AI. Now with AI, like new with AI, it's like organic, right? Like I don't know what this thing is, but apparently it's powered by this thing that's really trendy. And I don't know that we necessarily understand the implications of that, but we have to join the conversation about that. The sooner the better. Before we went on air, we talked about we already feel like we're 9 steps behind. That's no justification to then set policy or set practice in place to guarantee that we'll be 10 and 12 and 15 steps behind going forward. So yeah, let's lean into it. Let's go.
Yeah, and I think that's it. Then you kind of get to this place where you consider, okay, what are the things? Well, maybe I want to reframe and say it like this: there's a tendency to want to look to what will this look like in 2, 3, 5 years from now, and as such, sort of want to design backwards. And I totally get that. What we are hoping with this video series to do is to sort of say, what are we able to do, very much to John's point, now, so we don't end up kind of waiting 5 years. Yeah, and what might that look like with the understanding that it could and will inevitably change. So we talked a little bit before we got started here, John. You were mentioning process over product. I think
For
that's a
sure.
big piece of this, and so I ask you to kind of lean into that.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm gonna have to like throw myself at the mercy of your listenership here. Like, I'm not saying do as I say, don't do as I do. Like, I am just as guilty about what I'm about to spell out here, I think, as anybody. But like, as a teacher of a survey course, I taught high school for 12 years, high school English. Um, you're given like 400 years of content, and it's basically get to Civil War by Christmas. That's the game, right? And so if you have 8 novels to move through in 36 weeks, you're doing about 2 or 3 weeks on a novel, and the time it takes to read the novel takes about 2 to 3 weeks. Then you do like 1 or 2 days of like fun review and big themes, and you do like a test or the essay. Or I think traditionally we go home and say, now write that essay, right? I think the challenge is, and I'm call myself out on it. Like I said, this has been my classroom practice for a generation. Students have on their phones, even if you ban it in your schools, the second they walk in the hallway to the restroom on the bus, they can write an essay about Huck Finn, the Scarlet Letter, the Great Gatsby, Their Eyes Are Watching God. Whatever content you could think to teach, they can have a pretty solid 5-paragraph essay or a blog post or a traditional like book report in the time it takes them to walk out of your classroom or walk back in it. And the challenge is so much of our traditional curricular design has been teach, 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 teach up to like day 2.5 week, then like spend 1 or 2 days on review or test and expect students to come in with a written essay. How do you think those essays get written? And in an era of chat GPT, whereas before it might have been you had a brother or a friend or a trainer or a coach who was able to like get you that essay outside of class, now that thing lives right on their phone. So I think that's a pedagogical reality we have to be aware of because we're constantly told to do more with less time. Right? History classes now have to cover 9/11, where 20 years ago that was not the story. Building through like the war on terror is a major unit. How do we get that done? Well, we also have to cover Vietnam and World War II and World War I. And I think it starts with a radical reframing for us as teachers, how we spend our instructional time. And you mentioned it in the beginning, to put that process every bit as part of our pedagogy over the product, where you really did have a writer's workshop in the classroom for 3 days, 4 or 5 days. And that's not just to pay lip service to it for one essay. If your kid's going to be writing in every unit, maybe instead of teaching 8 books, you're scaling back to like 6. And in those 6 books, then you're spending 4 to 5 weeks in a more thematic, broad study that connects to like real world application, writing processes, current events, articles, synthesis of like text to text, text to world comparison. And for my curricular designers who are listening, I realize that's like pulling your hair out but there's only so much time. But I don't know, but I mean, maybe you can be a funny bit of that. Does that feel both reasonable and at the same time totally like pie in the sky?
It feels familiar for sure. Like, as you said, kind of thinking about the general scope and sequence of a course and the rhythms of what it means to do the English thing that we all sort of do with books and essays that follow. So finding, I don't know, so glad you bring that up, like the time to slow the process down, to do the writer's workshop piece bit by bit. And one of the challenges that I think gets posed here, and this was the subject of another section of this resource, which I'll throw up there while I've kind of finished what I'm going to share. Once you have like found that time, it gets really difficult to leverage these tools and support, because some of the tools students are not allowed to be on until they're 18. Without parental permission. And so obviously there's the opportunity to like, nobody's sending those home today though. Like I'm not hearing schools rushing out to make that happen. And so we're looking to things like, like a school AI to create a space for one particular aspect of one piece of the writing process, maybe as it pertains to draft work. And, I think about those traditional essays and trying to structure a writing workshop around that. It tends to kind of follow, right, where you have body paragraph time, you have intro time, you have conclusion time, and the various like sub steps within that. How do we help learners be able to learn to be, and I would say it this way, critical readers, by understanding what it takes to structure an essay? Because even if we're allowing ChatGPT and these things to do those pieces for us, there's still sort of a learn by doing aspect that allows you to then later like navigate other things that you're reading as a result of it. And I realize these aren't easy questions for us to
no pressure.
but these are part of the things professionally hopefully we're starting to chew on. Yeah.
So I have 2 things. One, I'm going to do the bad teacher thing, which I actually sent you a link to. Like you can look at it while I'm doing the thing with the vamps and buys us time.
Cool.
The second thing is I think I'll date myself, which is a great way to be ingratiated to my younger audience. But back in my day, there used to be this thing called a card catalog. And when we would do library research, you kind of had to know that the zeros or the 800s were different sections about different things, right? All the nonfiction texts were organized. I realize this Dewey Decimal System is largely antiquated for the average user, but I am a super user of Google and libraries as a direct result of the fact that I had to know Dewey. Because when you learn the rules, you can kind of break the rules, right? So I can go in, like my use of ChatGPT is, I would consider pretty advanced, because I work full-time in the space where I'm working with teachers to support AI, support innovation, collaboration, creative teaching. And these robots become cobots. You can do awesome stuff provided you know how to talk to them in a way that gets what you need, right? I think it's because I learned all of the pieces along the way that I was able to get there. And that's very process oriented. Hey, I'm looking for a book about topic X, not just I need you to solve my problem on Y, right? So I think that really does help to remind ourselves as teachers, we are teaching our kids the 21st century version of what was the Dewey Decimal System. There is no world in which my own children will grow up and be using ChatGPT in its current form. It's very antiquated, very old school. Like I had to use microfiche in doing research in grad school. But the skills by which they think to talk to the technology, to integrate with the cobots, but that makes them a super user. And so one of the things that I've said, I sent it in the link too, I love this tool. It's AI powered. It does cost a few bucks if you do like the premium version, like all this stuff does. But I love MyShortAnswer.com. Have you played with it, Andrew?
A little bit. Actually, there's an individual at the heart of this work that with this company that is from Nebraska.
Look at this small world. I am not from Nebraska. I have been through it. It's lovely. But I've had a chance to play with this software quite a bit too. My short answer is great. I'm a big geek for gamification. My first 2 books have been really about that in the education space. And that short answer writing prompt in a gamified environment is not like button mashing with the Kahoots and the quizzes and the Quizlets, the blue kits, where students are just sort of like doing bar trivia that's dressed up. What My Short Answer does is it gives every student in class a writing prompt that you can engineer. And then it uses a gamified like tournament that has students vote on which one is stronger and why, and then give feedback using either, drop down tabs that you've put in or free response to text, which is, okay, a blind submission here you see submission A, and a blind submission here you see submission B. Which of these is stronger in terms of its technique? Which one has a better transition? Tell me X and Y and Z. And then the students all get that deep feedback that Andrew was actually submission A or John was submission B. And there's a bunch of ways you can kind of jigger it. That's cool. And it feels for students like fun to try to guess what one was the winner. You feel smart because you guessed the right one, but even more so because you helped to write the right one blind to your classmates. I mean, if you're I was that kid in school. I'm that nerdy kid who can't, like maybe succeed on the athletic field, but to have a really great answer in the classroom suddenly helps your social cloud, right? It says, well, that person's a person I want on my team. I want to sit with them at lunch. They know what they're talking about. That person is a good study buddy or a good person to lean on when we have a group project. And it has the bells and whistles and the lights and brights and that all game stuff does. But small ways like that in a classroom to say, let's just practice our essays. Guys, open up your links. We're going to write about what we read last night. Which of these is the strongest? Why? The fastest way to get students to become better writers is to practice good reading. And to read and then autopsy in real time, what is this piece doing that that piece didn't do? Or vice versa. I mean, that's but one such example that is an AI upgrade to what is an old school teaching technique that really speaks to like the TikTok speed of our learners today.
Love that as a share out and an opportunity for folks to then think about. You could do that, as we said, for parts of the intro, for the entirety of the intro, for parts of the body paragraph, parts or the body paragraph in total, conclusion, etc. And so as you're getting a chance to kind of weigh those out to foster that sensibility, and that really models, I think that serves not only the now, but then that 5 years from now, whenever the technology is being leaned on heavily for writing these things for us, that we could still be going back through and having, that human component where we place our eye on it to make sure that it does accurately capture what we're hoping to achieve, right?
100%. I have another one for you. I'll put it in the chat here too. Then we can put it on the share out for
Cool.
teachers. This is a little bit more for reading. And when I say reading, I speak the language of Universal Design for Learning, UDL, right? Reading is not just with our eyes necessarily. If you're reading in Braille, for example, you read with your fingers. And if you're reading in an audiobook, like people like me are dyslexic. You wouldn't know it because I taught English class and I write books for a living, but this is what I do, right? I read books with my ears. I love synthesizing information, different ways to intake it, because it's like training wheels that helps me get to feeling more comfortable with the reading. Can't tell you how many times I've been on a plane and I've been listening to an audiobook while I read it at the same time, because it helps me block out the distractions. One that I absolutely love is an experimental project from Google. It's called Notebook LM. It is experimental, so by the time I put this link up, I'm sure it'll have gone down or changed websites or changed names. You realize like ChatGPT, Notebook LM, DALL-E 2.0, all this stuff is going to always change, but we're shifting to a mindset change, not a tool set change, right? So as this stuff comes and goes, there's going to be new iterations of it. What I love about Notebook LM is it's basically a closed source version of all the stuff you can do on a ChatGPT. You upload the documents or the information you want it to become smart about, and it synthesizes and spits it out. While that's more of a, quote, reading tool, what's really cool about it is once you've done this, you push a button. Take Andrew's book, for example, take my book, for example, and upload the PDFs of them, if you have the copyrights. and with the push of a button, it'll generate a synthesis of the main talking points of document A and document B. But you push a button and it'll generate an audio podcast with two hosts sharing a conversation in a very dialogic manner. It feels real, but it's actually AI generated, where it's the main points that have to fly over at 20,000 feet of all the things that Andrew's book had to offer, all the things my book has to offer. That makes reading less scary for kids. And stuff like when you have a student transfer into your class and it's like, I don't know, your third unit, and they say, what did I miss? That you'd have that at the ready to then make them more acclimated, right? Meeting the students where they are. So much of what we're doing with the AI has the power to move faster, but it also gives us the permission to move slower, right? Giving our students multiple means of entry to a place that often can feel like being sprayed with a fire hose, right? We really want to give our students that time to go home and massage those things. And maybe this is a thing that if you're in a high school classroom, for example, your students are all taking notes in a Google Doc. Then all of those Google Docs are uploaded as a single file or a series of PDFs into something like Notebook LM. And then that flyover document is then submitted as a podcast that all your students could then come back and listen to this year, this midterm, this final exam, or down the road if they're trying to prep for next content. That's at the ready, that's at their fingertips, and that's very, very, I think, affirming, especially for young learners, that they didn't have to get it all at once. Because even on this podcast, like we got 15, 20 minutes, it's going to fly right by. How can we make them feel like Netflix, like TikTok? This is binge worthy. You can come back to it. And that process is every bit as important as that finished piece that could be written in 3 seconds using the device.
Oh my gosh, so many things to play off of that. One, my son who's 10, recently we were playing around with Notebook LM, and we got to the place where he's like, will it read my homework? And I was like, yeah, you can totally do that. So a piece of his writing, we did exactly this. He's like, but I wrote it like by hand. And I go, no, if we take a picture, it can read your handwriting. Stop it, Dad. So we uploaded it and created this podcast. And he listens to the podcast that we do for here at the CC too. And it was so funny because it was like, in his essay, Easton contends, and my son at 10 just thought he was the biggest thing in the world to like have this, like talking so professionally about his work, which was cool and fun and engaging, and brings an energy that you're talking about. And when I think about the spaces that we're allowed to share tools like this, and again, we mentioned earlier, like some of this stuff gets a little dicey with actually implementing it into the classroom. I love your example there of, hey, I can bring this up though as the adult in the room on the screen, illustrate how we're bringing all these pieces together, create then a resource, which is this audio podcast conversation that I can then share out, right? Like that piece is fair game for me to be able to like impart to students. And I, as recently as last week, was leading some AI stuff with some administrators and said, hey, as new legislation comes up in January and you're trying to, at the speed of people able to churn this stuff out, keep up with those conversations and the revisions, maybe not a bad idea to get a first read, like you were talking about, by listening to a podcast overview about it. So then you can then lean into that heavy, dense text in a way that's much more nuanced. And so I like I said, so many great plays off of what you're saying there. Really great stuff, John.
No, absolutely. And since one more, because it's not a good podcast unless you leave people with like those, don't do everything, do one thing, right? This is like the treasure trove and like they can dive into it. I love Midjourney for my AI artwork. There are other ones. You can use ChatGPT and all sorts of things that are free online. One called Crayon. I like it online. But by the time I mentioned them again, they always change. There's one called Scribble Diffusion, which I was crazy about, but it's now been like swallowed to the ether. But as a writing activity, hey students, we're going to try to draw a picture that looks like X. Your goal is to work in a team, and every time you think you have a quality submission, share it with me. Though you can't type directly into this prohibited software for whatever reasons, you can give me the words and I'll copy and paste it and we'll drop it right in. And we'll have a whole class period. Example, you're teaching The Great Gatsby. We're trying to create photorealistic images of each of these characters on your mark, get, set, go. And team 1 is making all of the Jordans, and team 2 is making all the Gatsbys, and team 3 is all the Daisies, and on and on we are. But their goal is to have the most photorealistic or the most surrealistic picture by the end of that time, or the most surrealistic or photorealistic collection of pictures. That teaches prompt engineering, and it teaches that process is every bit as valuable as that finished first draft. It was good, but not great. What if we added a background of X? What if we added details of Y? What if it was in the style of Art Deco, 1920s? And then you're leveraging in those non-scary things like a light bit of research, right? A light bit of how did the internet work to access that card catalog of information, not just a Wikipedia level summary, but they're looking at fashions of the 1920s. They're looking at styles and settings of these spaces in New York. That's cool. And it creates an information literacy that then our students are that much more primed and excited to read a book with hard language, which will make them better writers through that thing. But again, that's a radical shift in how we think about teaching as a pre-teach activity, than just read chapter 1 by Tuesday, we'll test it, and on Wednesday we'll move forward with chapter 2.
And that has been the rub of these conversations, is all of us, even before we start recording, going, gosh, here's maybe the now, but then like, how can I not have an eye to the future and to that next? And I think that really aligns too. And so I'll encourage folks to watch, obviously, all the videos in this series, but this, the last one that we have that kind of does some of that future prognosticating, and the idea that maybe in terms of assessment, when it comes to writing being maybe the only avenue through which we follow up on the novel that you mentioned earlier, perhaps in that familiar rhythm as we do, that it becomes a much more robust portfolio of sorts, or a presentation that accompanies it. And so, John, your point there about having these visuals to complement or supplement in some of those additional ways in which we're representing what we have learned in support and in collaboration with AI and that artificial intelligence and human intelligence interplay. Those are some great examples. And so thank you so much for your time. It's always great to connect. I'd encourage folks to follow, subscribe, all the things so you can get in touch with John. I learned from him ongoing. We have had him on the podcast in the past, and so hopefully we'll have him back on there again as well. So it points you to that. And then one more time, if you're watching this on YouTube, there is a core resource that we're housing all these videos in, along with other links to some of the things we brought up, for example, like you saw across the screen today. So you can check that out for kind of everything in its totality. John, thanks for your time, buddy. It's great having you on.
Peace, my friend. Really excited. Thanks.